Everyone hits a bump in the road. What do you do with it? Be inspired as we explore the ways people experience, navigate, and manage the ups and downs and twists and turns in this road trip called life. Welcome to another episode of Bump in the Road. The basic podcast is always free. We also have a premium subscription called Bump 2 that lets you listen in on extended behind-the-scenes conversations with our guests. Check it out at www.bumpintheroad.us. Kevin Palmieri is on a mission. On a personal level, he follows a path that he calls holistic self-improvement. And he delivers his thoughts, experiences, and wisdom through his podcast and workshops. His podcast is Next Level University. Please welcome Kevin Palmieri to Bump in the Road. Kevin, welcome to Bump in the Road. If you would, tell us your story.
First, thank you so very much for having me. I appreciate it very much. My story starts, as most/all do, when I was a younger human than I am today. Just for context, I was raised by my mom and my grandmother. I didn't know my dad. I didn't meet my dad with the understanding that he was my father until I was 27. So obviously that plays a role in a young man's life, and it plays a role in the life I have today as well at the age I am, right? So that's a through line of my life. Childhood, other than that, all things considered, I would say normal. We were lower middle class. We didn't have a ton of money. I do remember many times we would talk about how we were going to pay rent. So money also became a through line of importance for me. In high school, I made a decision that most other people didn't make. I decided that I didn't want to go to college. I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life, but I did know I didn't want to spend 4 years in school trying to figure it out. So I decided, look, I'm going to get a job and I'm going to avoid college like the plague. I just don't want to do it. So while all of my close friends were out at college, meeting people and partying and having new experiences, I was working at the local gas station. That was my first real big boy job. And I did that for a few years. And then I started the journey of trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life, because I still didn't really know. I wanted to fight professionally for a while. That was something I wanted to do. I wanted to be a baseball player. There was all these different things. So over the next few years, I job hopped. So I went from working as a gas station attendant to a personal trainer, truck driver, forklift operator. I cleaned bathrooms and floors at a hospital. I was in the on-call firefighting department for a very short time. I went to construction. And then I ended up getting a very unique opportunity that I thought was going to be the rest of my life. I got a job in an industry called weatherization. And weatherization was just us going into large buildings and making them more energy efficient. It's the easiest way to explain it. The majority of the buildings we worked on were state-owned or government-owned. So I quite literally went from making $15 an hour as a construction worker to $50, $60, $70, $120 an hour at this new job. So in my mind, this is it. Everything we did before this was the right thing. And this is the opportunity that we've really been dreaming of. And I'm going to do this forever. So if you looked at me when I was 25, you would see a young man who had a model girlfriend. I had a sports car. I had a high-paying job. I had a brand new apartment. And I had just competed in and won a bodybuilding show. So I quite literally had the body of my dreams, what I thought was the partner of my dreams, and the job of my dreams. Everything looked amazing. But truthfully, if you took a deeper look inside and you could see how I felt, I was super insecure. I lacked confidence. I had very little direction. I was afraid of my own shadow. I just was not well developed as a man. My partner left me, and that was my initial rock bottom moment. But I later found that rock bottom has a basement, if you keep digging, unfortunately. So my partner left me. I convinced myself that, yeah, working on myself would probably be valuable, but I just need to make as much money as humanly possible, because more money should equal less problems. So I'm going to just go, let me just do this. So the next year, I spent 10 months living on the road because there was a lot of travel required for my job, but I didn't care because I wanted to make as much money as possible, and that's how I could do it. I get to the end of the year, and I open my final pay stub, And I made $100,000 at 26 with no college degree. And maybe you're nodding your head as you hear that and saying, wow, good for you. But it didn't fix any of the things I thought it was going to fix. Yes, circumstantially, having more money was good for opportunity and circumstance. Sure. Internally, it did not make me feel any more confident. It did not help my self-worth. It didn't help my self-esteem. It didn't help any of that. If anything, I just had more imposter syndrome. So I realized that day that I have lived most of my life unconsciously. The opposite of unconscious is hyperconscious. So I started a podcast called the Hyperconscious Podcast, 2017, throwback. Fell in love with podcasting as I fell out of love with my job. I know I don't want to do what it takes to make it to the top again. I've already made it there and it didn't fix my problems. I don't want to do this job anymore. But this podcasting thing is not a viable occupation right now. Nobody's really listening and nobody really cares. And there isn't exactly a line out the door of people who are trying to give me their money, understandably. So I start calling out of work. I start leaving the job sites early. I start showing up late. And just for context, I would be gone for a week at a time. So it's not like me being homesick would be going to the office for 8 hours and then driving home. I would leave on Sunday. I would be gone Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. And I would get home 3 o'clock in the morning on Saturday and then do the same thing the next week. So me being homesick was really bad for my mental health because I had very little certainty in my life. And eventually it got to the point where I was in a hotel room 6 hours away from where I lived. My alarm clock went off at 5:15 in the morning. I sat up. I slid to the edge of the bed. I was lacing up my work boots as I had done 1,000 times before. But that morning it was different. To me, it felt like there was 10 televisions on in my head at the same time. And every single one was on a different station. And I just couldn't turn off the noise. And one of these TVs is saying, you're stuck here forever. I know you don't want to be here. I know you don't like this anymore, but what are you going to do? We're going to take a giant step back and start over? No way. If you ever left here, what would your friends say? I had a lot of significance in the amount of money I made. What would your family say? I was the most successful person in my family by far. And what are you going to do? I didn't have a plan A. I didn't have a plan B. I didn't have a plan C. I feel like I got lucky. I don't know if I'm going to get lucky again. And it was in that moment where I thought to myself, well, if I just take my life, I will take all my problems with me and I won't have to worry about tomorrow or next month or next year. And that was the rock bottom basement moment. Here I am 6 hours away from anybody who cares about me. Nobody really knows what I'm going through. I look super successful, but I don't feel any level of success at all. And I reached out to one of my friends who's now my business partner and the co-host of our show. And I said, hey man, I'm struggling. I'm having these thoughts. I'm having these feelings. I don't know. What do I do? I don't know what to do. Where do I go from here? And he said many things, but the thing I really remember that stands out to this day was, Kev, over the last couple years, your awareness has changed a ton, hyperconscious, but your environments have remained the same. I think it's time for you to change your environment. So I think 2 or 3 months later, I ended up leaving my job and then trying to do this full time, where I left my job, I left my income, and I said, all right, I'm going to be a podcaster and we're going to figure out how to grow this business together. And since 2018, I have been a full-time podcaster. For the first few years, I was working overtime with zero pay, but I think that's kind of how it goes in the beginning of any entrepreneurial business, any journey, really.
Wow. So many questions. Actually, I want to focus on that sense of what if I take my life? Because I think that is actually a really common experience. We don't talk about it.
Yeah.
But I certainly went through a period of my life which I called life wish, death wish. It wasn't that I wanted to die. It's that I wanted to live.
Yeah.
I don't know if that resonates with you in your situation.
Yeah, because to your point, a lot of us don't feel like we're living. We feel like we're going through the motions and we're waiting for the next. I think of it this way. We're usually waiting for two things. We're waiting for the next exciting thing or we're waiting for the next thing that scares us. So you're waiting for the next exciting thing. Maybe it's a trip of some sort that brings you up. It's like, oh yeah, 2 weeks away, 3 weeks away, a month away. or you're waiting for that next thing that stresses you out. I got to file my taxes. I keep pushing that off. I got to have that conversation with this person. I think for a lot of us, life is an experience of the big ups and the big downs. And unfortunately, the ups are very temporary and the downs are very temporary, usually. But we tend to live somewhere between, and it just isn't that exciting for most of us. And we don't feel like there's a ton of growth, and we don't feel like there's a ton of contribution. And we talked about this a little bit behind the scenes. We don't feel like there's a ton of purpose. And that purpose piece, that's where we get fulfillment. My life now is the hardest it's ever been in terms of what we do on the day to day, but it's also the most fulfilling. And I don't think that's a coincidence. I don't think that's a coincidence. I think there's a reason for that. So yeah, very much to your point, my life just felt gray. It felt bland. And I just thought there's no way I can keep doing what I'm doing right now. It's not like I had a plan. Not like I had a plan. This is what I'm going to do. This is how I'm going to do it. But it was more a real conversation with myself of if I wasn't around, I wouldn't have to deal with any of this. And I feel like it would just be a lot easier to just not be here. So I definitely resonate.
Yeah, no, I it's interesting. You look at the highs and lows in life, and I think the way you navigate them is with a sense of purpose. And purpose transcends those, wild gyrations, emotional gyrations, if you will. But how do you find purpose?
That is the $1 trillion question, not even the million or the billion. So here's my new perspective, and this is new within the last year and a half, probably. I think a lot of us have an understanding of what our purpose is, but where we get lost is when we try to figure out the vehicle to deliver the purpose. So if we think of purpose, for most of us, it probably is we want to help a unique subset of human accomplish a unique task in a unique way, right? I've always liked coaching. I've always liked helping people. But if you said, well, how are you going to do that? That's the vehicle. The purpose is the reason under why we do what we do. The vehicle is how we deliver it to the world. So this is my favorite question in the world. If you did not ever have to worry about money again, but what you did had to be in the service of others, the world, humanity, and the betterment of the place that we live on, what would your day-to-day life look like? You don't have to worry about money because that's the vehicle is, well, I don't know how I would make money. The purpose is how do you actually show up and what is the through line? What is the reason of why you do what you do? That's one of my favorite questions in the world. There's a bunch of other questions. What would I find you talking about on a Friday night when you're most animated, most passionate? What are you really good at? What have people told you that you're really good at? But here's the truth. I don't think I was a really good speaker. I don't think I was a really good storyteller. I definitely wasn't a good coach. Nobody was going to tell me that in the beginning. But if you said, if you had all the money and you didn't have to worry about paying the bills and you were going to do something for the betterment of humanity, I would say I would talk into a microphone every day. That's what I would do. I'd have really awesome conversations. I'd be very vulnerable. I'd be very real. And I would try to help people raise their awareness a little bit. That's what I would do. So that's really, to me, that's my favorite question. And then part two is you go try a bunch of stuff and you see what resonates. And when you get to the point where you start losing track of time, when you feel like you're adding value and you feel like you're in your purpose, that's a really good sign that you found your thing. When you lose track of time and you're in flow and you don't care what time it is and you don't care what the weather is, you're just here, that's a really good suggestion that you're closer at least to your thing.
What would you say is awareness?
Awareness. The understanding of why things are the way they are, and thus understanding why things aren't the way that they aren't. It's just, the understanding. Awareness is the familiarity with what makes us us. And then from there, there's just so much opportunity and so much potential and so much control. So here's it's a layering, right? I tend to do better interviews on podcasts when the hosts are women. Why? That's an awareness question. Usually I feel safer. Why? Because oftentimes when I'm on, and I don't want to, stereotype or blanket statement, but sometimes I'm on with men and they don't like being as vulnerable as I do. Why? That's not their platform. And you could just keep going down. So I come into an interview today with someone like you, and I can think to myself, okay, I expect this to go really, really, really well. And I feel safe, and I know I'm going to feel safe, and I know I can really put myself out there and be vulnerable and be authentic. This most likely will be a really good opportunity for me to connect. But that all starts with the awareness of sometimes when I go on this show, I feel this way. Other times when I go on these shows, I feel this way. Why is that? And then digging into that.
Yeah, well, I think that human interplay is really important. I mean, I do a lot of podcasts as a guest, and, I have the same experience you do, not male, female necessarily, but just it depends on the host.
Yeah, of course.
Very much.
Of course.
One of the things you talk about in terms of really reaching for your purpose is consistency.
Consistency is one of those, I think we hear about it so often. It is like if somebody said to you, what's the most important key to success? Somebody would probably say consistency. What is the most important thing for a successful relationship? Just being consistent in your character and your trust and your vulnerability. I think with your purpose, sometimes there's resistance at the beginning. Again, going back to the purpose in the vehicle. If we didn't have to worry about getting any results, I think more of us would live in our purpose because you just get to do what you love every day. But here's the thing. In the beginning, leaning into your purpose, it's rough because you don't get any results at all. And you don't get any significance. And usually nobody really cares. You care a ton, which is amazing. But nobody else really does in the beginning because there's just not a lot going on. So without consistency, it's really hard to ever get to the place where your purpose compounds. I've been podcasting for 7 years. Nobody really cared for the first 3. I cared, but if I stopped after year 1 or year 2 or year 3, I would be the guy in the bar 50 years from today saying, yeah, I used to be a podcaster. I could have done what that guy's doing or whatever, or regretting the fact that I quit 3 years in. Just like right now, if we quit 7 years in, we lose all the opportunity that we'd have in the future. We only get to write down what we've accomplished today, which isn't that much compared to the opportunity that we have to lean into the future. So I don't know if anything transparently is really, really possible without consistency. You're a pilot. You fly one time, you're not going to be that good. I'm willing to bet.
No, it takes a lot of consistent effort to be safe.
Yeah. And the more you do it, the more it becomes second nature. I'm sure for you, flying a plane is probably like driving a car for me to a degree.
Oh, but much more fun.
Well, yes. Well, we were talking about that behind the scenes. I'm going to keep my wheels on the ground. You take yours up into the sky. But yeah, without consistency, I just think it's really hard. It's really hard to get anywhere, not just from the external results, but imagine if you're a speaker. Do you think if you do one speech a year, you'll be nearly as good if you did 500 a year? No, there's so much internal stuff that changes when you do something for a long enough period of time.
It's interesting. I totally agree with you. Consistency is really important. And yet, inconsistency, you can get into a rut. And you have to shake that up. So how do you balance that kind of evolution to keep things new and interesting and still stick to your base of consistency?
It's a conversation of, on a scale of 1 to 10, how much do you need variety? And on a scale of 1 to 10, how much do you need certainty? I think I'm a very unique case because I don't like variety. So for me, I don't care about fun and exciting. I don't want new. I want the same thing all day, every day. I think the conversation is, what does success look like to you? And this is the beautiful part of being able to have an open, honest conversation. not everybody is supposed to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning and have a routine and do this and do this and do this. That's not success for them. I think the first step is identifying what success actually is to you. We did an episode where we talked about this recently. I don't think everybody is supposed to be financially free, quote unquote, because I don't know that that's actually what people would value. If you being financially free means you don't get to go on vacation for 20 years, is that a trade you're willing to make? If not, maybe that's not the way you want to live your life. Maybe you want to live your life completely different. So I think it's really just sitting down and saying, all right, what's important to me? Because maybe I don't want to just be 100% regimented and 0% flowy. Maybe I want to be 70% regimented and 30% flowy, or 50-50. I think that's a really important conversation to have with yourself, because it dictates the way that you do everything. And I always say this when I'm talking, please filter everything I say through your own core values, core beliefs, and core aspirations. Because your life, your experiences, the results you want are going to be completely different than mine. So I think we'll wrap it up with a bow. I think it's a question of awareness. How well do you know what you actually want? That's the best way to avoid regret. The best way to avoid regret is to be honest with yourself and say, yeah, I might miss out on blank, but I know that going into this, and I think this is more valuable in terms of what I desire and what I appreciate and what I want. That way, at least you can kind of avoid the regret, if possible.
I think having a good mindset is really critical. How do you have a meditation practice or anything like that? Or what do you do to keep your mindset really in shape?
Yeah, I did for a while. It's time for me to start meditating again, I think. I had that intuitive ping recently of there's just too much mayhem and not enough silence. There's a lot of mayhem going on with business. For me, I kind of get to learn for a living. If I'm not learning, I can't teach. And I get to have cool conversations like this every single day for a living. So I have the opportunity to practice honing my mindset every day pretty much. That's really helped me a ton. The podcast, I always joke, yeah, it's helpful for the audience, and we have a lot of listeners all over the world. I've probably learned more from our podcast than anybody on the planet, just because I'm here every day doing it and trying to think of things and just be better. But the root of it for me is learning. I try to learn for 30 minutes every day. That's been super helpful, especially as a kid who did not resonate with education, did not think he was smart enough, did not think he could be smarter, didn't think I could be most of the things I am today. The mindset for me comes from knowledge, because the more I learn, the more certain I feel that even if things do go off the rails today, it's not the end of the world. It's okay. We can fix it. We're going to make mistakes. We're going to mess up. I think there is just the room in your mindset that you are not fixed. The growth mindset versus the fixed mindset. There's a book by Carol Dweck called Mindset, a very, very wonderful book. I always suggest to everyone. Just learning, I think. Learning from me. I think I'm probably a more unique case where this is what I do for a living, so it's a little bit different. But I could not do this the way I do it if I didn't learn as much as I did, because that keeps a fresh perspective. And I think just hearing other people's stories really, really helps me hone my own mindset. It's not the end of the world. People have it a lot different than I do. So that perspective is also key for me as well.
Yeah, I think being a podcaster is an enormously learning journey. There's a technical and business aspect of it, but I learn from absolutely everybody that comes on my podcast. Their stories are incredible. And personally, I'm fascinated by how people navigate and experience these bumps in the road, because so many people hit a bump and they stop.
Yeah.
They don't go forward. And the key is to find that courage to move forward when you don't know where you're going.
Yeah. I think life is uncertain. I just think we lose sight of the uncertainty on the day to day. And then when something happens to us where we think, oh my goodness, I have no idea what the future is going to look like. You don't really anyway. I just think, I don't know, we have an assumption that it's going to look a certain way, but does it really look the way we think it's going to? Probably not.
Never.
Right? I think we have the thought of, well, I really want it to look this way. That's great. But you can really only paint a picture in your future with the colors you have in the present. in a way. Now, obviously, if you're a visionary, things are different. But yeah, I would totally agree with that. I think uncertainty is a very confusing thing. And when you hit a rock bottom, or when you have a struggle, you have a challenge, you have a bump in the road, you have that type of stuff, everything feels more uncertain, but I don't know that it really is. You're just more aware of the uncertainties that have kind of always been there.
I think uncertainty is an opportunity personally.
Yeah.
And uncertainty actually speaks to being present. If you're present at this moment now, whatever you create now will create the next moment, etc., the next and next and the next. Yeah. And there's uncertainty in that, but that uncertainty to me is creativity and possibility.
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah, I think uncertainty is a possibility for expansion. But to your point, as long as your mindset is there, there's a million stories of people that had some things happen to them and they use that as a launch pad for something. But for every one of those stories, there's at least one story for someone who didn't have the same reaction. And I think to your point, a lot of that is mindset. And a lot of that is your trauma responses and your past conditioning. But I like to think of it as an opportunity as well. I didn't always. I definitely didn't always, but I do now more than ever.
What changed your mind?
I had a super fixed mindset. I just assumed the way I am today is the way I'm going to be forever. I remember having a conversation where I literally said this to my business partner. Why should I read books? I don't get it. That was my conversation. And he said, well, you're going to learn stuff. And I said, yeah, I understand that, but how is that going to change me? I just couldn't fathom why it was important to learn every day. It just didn't make sense to me. As I learned and as I grew and as I evolved, I realized that the reason most people don't make it is because they quit. That's like, I mean, how many people could get a podcast of 1,500 episodes if they just kept going? A lot of people could. We look cool because we did, but it's just because we kept going. And if we keep going for another 30 years, we'll be really successful. But it's just the will to continue going. I think we all have the opportunity to keep going to the degree we want it. And again, circumstance. But initially, it was just the mindset of the person who I am today does not have to be the person I am in 30 years. That's more of a decision than anything. But you can also decide the person I am today is a seedling of the person I will be in 30 years. And those are just two very different lives.
Absolutely. It goes to the Buddhist notion of beginner's mind. Have a clean slate, have an open mind, and let experiences come into your life, let knowledge come into your life, and you might be surprised where it takes you.
Yes. I'm very surprised, to say the least.
One of the other things that you talk about are limiting beliefs, and I think that's really important. How have you changed? Obviously, in terms of education, you've changed your beliefs enormously. What other beliefs have you changed to realize the success you have now?
One of the things I had early on was that I was shy. I don't know where that came from. I think I've always kind of been quiet. I don't really like being the center of attention. I am naturally extremely introverted, believe it or not. And that really shifted for me when I started speaking. But here's the thing. One of the biggest limiting beliefs I had, and I think most of us have, are I could never be blank. Insert it. I could never be a good parent. I could never be a good business owner. I could never be in shape. Just insert whatever it is. The reason it's called a limiting belief is because when you say it, and then when you believe it like that, it kind of becomes part of your identity. And the only real way to break it is to do the thing you don't believe you can do in the first place. And that's why it's so darn challenging to break them. Because if you don't think you can be a speaker, the only real way to do it is to break speaking down into the smallest parts possible and say, well, you know what? Today, I'm going to just record a video into my phone. I'm not even going to show anybody. That's going to be my first speech. It's going to be a private speech. Nobody's going to see it. And then it goes from that to you sending that to someone eventually, and then speaking on social media on your story, and then maybe doing a stage with like 5 people, and then continuing that. I think that's really all I've had the opportunity to do. I didn't think I was a good podcaster. I still don't think I'm as good as I'm going to be in 10 years, but I've just done so many reps. So yeah, it's really that. For a lot of us, I always use this as an analogy. My wife used to suggest to me all the time, hey, let's get Indian food tonight. And I would say, I don't like Indian food. And she would say, have you ever had it? And I would think about it. And I would say, no, I've never had it, but I know I don't like it. I can tell. I don't like it. Indian food now is my favorite food ever. I think of our fears and our limiting beliefs the same way, where of course you're afraid of it. You haven't done it enough yet to get over the fear of it in the first place. I don't know why the universe is set up that way. I don't know why the world is set up that way, but usually it's the thing that we're running from the most that we need to do to overcome the fear in the first place. Whether it's heights, whether it's water, the ocean, whatever it may be, exposure therapy really is the simplest answer. I've just had exposure to most of the things that scare me, and now I just have a different relationship with them. Do I want to fly a plane? No. Am I better than I've ever been when I take long flights? Yes. But that was just exposure therapy over time, and having that challenging moment of saying, all right, I'm going to step on this plane. Once I get on the plane, there's not really anything I can do. I'm not flying it. I just got to sit here quietly. And when we get there, I'm going to get off the plane. And that was just kind of step one for me. Is the hardest part's getting on there. Once I'm on there, there's really nothing I can do.
No, at that point, you're captive. You bring up, I think, really important points about consistency, baby steps, and building things. And I think that when you take baby steps and you build your path, you own that knowledge and that experience, and no one can ever take it away from you. And I think that's such an important part of the path, because sometimes you may do something that doesn't work. But if you really put your heart and soul into it, and you looked at the educational aspect, what can I learn? What new skills can I bring to it? That will serve you well for whatever your next step is, don't you think?
1,000,000%. I believe that most of us have been lied to. I think we live in a place where people say if your goals don't scare you, they're not big enough. I do not aspire to that belief at all. My belief is I would much rather you say, I don't really think I can get to the top of the mountain, if I'm being truthful. If we're having a real conversation here, I don't think I'm going to make it to the top of the mountain. Okay, cool. Where do you think you could get? I think I could get to the second base camp. Awesome. Let's do that. You are going to learn so many lessons getting to the second base camp that may allow you to get to the top of the mountain eventually. But if you look at the top of the mountain, you say to yourself, I could never get there, and you don't start, to your point, you don't get any of the lessons. None of them. And what if what you learn on level 1 adds value to you when you get to level 9? But if you set out on your quest and said, my goal is to make it to level 9, and you didn't have the belief, you may never start. There is a sweet spot. There is a sweet spot of, I think you should set a goal that you know will be challenging, but you also believe with 100% of yourself that you can accomplish. Your level of goals, again, I don't want to blanket statement it. From what I have seen, it is beneficial to set the level and the size of your goals connected to the level of self-belief you have. If you have a level 5 belief in yourself and your confidence, set a level 5 or 6 goal. If you have a level 10 belief in yourself and you believe you can accomplish anything, climb the top of the mountain, because you'll get humbled and it won't matter because you believe in yourself so much. If you have a level 1 confidence and belief in yourself, set a very, very small goal so you can build some trust, you can build some momentum, you can get a new perspective, you can get some self-belief, you can get that type of stuff. Momentum is key when it comes to goals.
Yeah, momentum and baby steps build momentum. No
100%.
question about it. So if you could, there's so many good points in this conversation, but if you could distill it down to about 3 points about what does it really take to navigate a bump in the road, what advice would you give people?
I would say 1, it is unreasonably beneficial to have people around you that can help you handle the bump. In my story, the thing I said is I reached out to someone who I trusted, who I felt I could be vulnerable with, and he was able to give me some really good advice that helped me move forward. So community is huge. The people around you are helping or hurting, unfortunately. It just tends to be that way. That would be 1. Two is kind of a through line of what we talked about today, perspective. I know it probably feels like it's the end of the road or the end of the world, and it probably feels the worst it's ever been. But let's take a look back at all the other bumps in the road you've had and what happened from them. That perspective, I think, is key. And then I think the last thing is direction is far more important than speed. You might have a bump in the road and you might be struggling. The key is not to fix the pothole now. The key is to just start patching it. You don't have to fix it today and asphalt over it and make it the smoothest it's ever been. It's more about the direction than it is the speed. If you're just improving a little bit, just a tiny bit, and you do that for a long enough period of time, you will be way better off than you were in the first place. But it's that New Year's resolution mindset of, okay, I'm going to lose 50 pounds in the next 2 months. When in reality, if you said, I'm going to go to the gym 3 times a week this week, then maybe I'll try 3 times next week, and eventually I'll get to 4, you probably would lose the 50 pounds if you did that for the entire year. So yeah, direction is far more important than speed, would be my third point.
Thank you for listening. I hope you'll support this podcast by becoming a Bump 2 subscriber. Buy us a cup of coffee. It's your support that makes this podcast and website possible. I hope you found something in today's podcast that inspires you along your own life's path, because sometimes a bump in the road is actually a portal into a more conscious and meaningful life.